if you're into conspiracies, this is right up there with JFK. It's one of the granddaddies of all conspiracies. The idea that the Apollo missions to the moon were faked, a complete hoax. And we're going right to one of the key investigators in this field. Bart Sibrel is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, investigative journalist. He's produced television programs and documentaries for over 40 years. He's been employed by two of the three major U.S. networks, worked as a TV news reporter, produced segments for ABC, NBC, CBS. Bart regularly speaks as a guest commentator regarding the moon landing fraud, and he's appeared as such on NBC, Fox, CNN, HBO to discuss his films. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and Astronauts Gone Wild. His latest book, Moon Man, is Bart's revealing memoir, recalling his harrowing journey investigating what really happened during America's famous Apollo missions. Bart Sibrel, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Good, Richard. How about yourself?
Terrific.
You only look 15 years older.
That makes sense. Yeah, do the math. In fact, I think it was about the time that A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon came out, maybe a couple of years after it came out. You were on one of my old terrestrial radio programs. Um, it'd be a nice crash course for people who are not quite up to speed on this. And I know on your website, you give a beautiful, concise 3-minute kind of summation, everything you need to know in terms of, why the moon landing was faked. Can you just kind of quickly run through that and get my listeners up to speed?
Sure, that video is on my website homepage, which is Sibrel.com, just my last name, S as in Sam, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com. It's a 3-minute video that I made, just kind of summarizing the points why it's not a theory that they faked the moon missions. It's an actual fact. And if you want, I can just run by those 4 proofs really quickly.
Yes,
In
please.
my opinion, each of these proofs would convict it in a court of law independently. And we have 4 times the evidence. So the first proof is this. If the moon landings happened in 1969, then that's the first time in the history of the world in which technology was greater in the past and in the future. But seeing how that's a scientific and historic impossibility, that means it was a bluff, like in poker. For example, today, with 54 years better technology, the farthest that NASA can send astronauts into space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon in the latest mission. Funny, they could play golf and drive cars on the moon 54 years ago, but today they can't even land and they can't even send humans beyond Earth orbit, you see? And they did this with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone. If you added up all the computing power of NASA in 1969, it was 1/1,000,000th of what's in your cell phone. So you're saying 54 years ago with 1/1,000,000th the computing power, and it was the only time that NASA has kept a schedule in the entire history of NASA. They've never been on schedule, not a single time, except the most complicated mission of all time. They were ahead of schedule. So 54 years later, the most industrialized nation on earth, China, says it's going to take 15 years from today to have the technology to walk on the moon. But 54 years ago, it only took half that time. Isn't that interesting? So you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than you can today. When the atomic bomb blew up, just 10 years later, it was 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. The reason why people don't see this, Richard, is their emotional attachment to the event. I mean, whoever killed Kennedy, he's still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why. 9/11, all those people are dead regardless of who did it and why. This is different. This is a positive lie. I talked to an aerospace professor at a major university who said even if an Apollo astronaut confessed on national TV that the moon landings were fake, he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. It is literally a god to people. So that's the first proof. This is the first time in history you have 1,000 times greater technology in the past and in the future, which is impossible, which means they didn't go into story. Then go to Sibrel.com. You'll see a picture. You can insert it if you want, but it's shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. Well, just go out into the sunlight in your front yard, your parking lot at work when there's no clouds in the sky, and you'll see two trees, two telephone poles, two people. No matter which direction, they're always parallel. It's impossible for the shadows to intersect in sunlight because the sun is a million times bigger than the earth. It's going to cast shadows on the entire continent the same direction, or the moon. So when they intersect at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart, that means it's electrical lighting, which means they're not on the moon, which means they didn't go to the moon. So that proves it. You could prove the moon landing fraud with one photograph. Just take a jury outside, show them parallel shadows, come inside. Juries don't have courtrooms don't have windows most of the time, and you just bring in an electrical light, and you'll see if one person stands on one side of the light and the other person stands on the other side of the light, they throw converging shadows. You just proved the moon landings are fake with one picture that they claim was lit with sunlight when they intersect, which is impossible mathematically. So that proves it. Then, as showcased in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is on the homepage of Sibrel.com, a film that cost nearly $1 million, that was financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, who gave me the money because he knows the moon missions were fake, and he says this is, very unpatriotic of our country to have manipulated the citizens this way. We found classified footage dated 2 days into the Apollo 11 flight of them faking being halfway to the moon with a 1 foot model of the Earth. The lights come up, it's a 1 foot model. That's what convinced me. I considered it a theory that they didn't go until I found that footage. That would prove it in a court of law. And then lastly, Moon Man at Sibrel.com, a book that just came out. I read it myself in audio or Kindle or print. We have an eyewitness by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. As the guy is dying, okay, fearing the judgment of God, he confesses, first of all, that he's a murderer. The military police come in from the United States Air Force. They say, who did you kill? Because he killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base. They say, why did you do it? He said, well, we were sworn to secrecy under threat of death because they filmed Apollo 11 at our base June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. President Johnson showed up the first of 3 days, stood beside the guy. He gave him a list of 15 people who were allowed in to observe. We printed that list in the book. And so that was the main thing he wanted to confess, just that he killed somebody. And the reason why was because his friend thought it was morally wrong, was going to tell a reporter, and he killed him to keep it a secret. So that's the fourth proof. I wish it were a theory. It seems like a theory. Oh, they did, fake the moon landing, but they did. What does that mean? It means our country is so far gone. Why did Clinton say he had the affair? Do you remember why, Richard? Because he could get away with it, because I could.
Right.
And this is a completely unnecessary lie. Now, if Robert Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, says the CIA killed his uncle, guess who killed his uncle? So that means the CIA, I think that's called election interference, don't you think? And that's not by Russia. That's by the United States federal government against a Democrat. They killed him. Then Robert McNamara, defense secretary during the Vietnam War, said the public was against it. So we got together with the CIA, said we need a Pearl Harbor type of thing, and we completely manufactured this alleged attack from North Vietnam on an American ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Congress passed a law called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution based on a CIA fabrication. Said out of his own mouth, it never happened. Led to the death of 3 million people, including 58,220 Americans. So if they're willing to kill their own president, willing to kill 58,000 of their own soldiers, I don't think they have a problem faking an image of the moon on television. So that's my opening statement. Thank you for your patience.
The case rests, Your Honor.
There you go.
I want to come back and pick up on the testimony of Eugene Akers. I just want to talk a little bit more about, well, let me jump ahead because you sent me something. You sent me an email, and it's a video on YouTube. It's about advanced AI is able to detect that the moon pictures are fake. Can you tell us a little bit about how AI is disproving these?
Yeah, this just came out. That's probably why I sent it to you. This is on my homepage. Just scroll down at Sibrel.com. There's an article about it and it shows the video. So, they have these conventions. For me, it was broadcast TV conventions in Vegas, see the latest camera every year. Other people, it's automobiles. You go and see the automobile that can get 150 miles per gallon, but somehow it's never sold commercially. But you can see it, sometimes test drive it, right? So they have AI conventions. What's the latest and greatest AI? This was just a couple of months ago in Moscow, right? So because it's in Moscow, Vladimir Putin is there, plus all the other top AI leaders. So what they did was to make the latest and greatest AI, they took a bunch of individual AIs and they hooked them up together like cells in a brain. It's called the neural network. Cost millions and millions and billions of dollars by Google, a decade worth of research into this thing. And they gave access like a test drive. You want to test drive the 150 mile per gallon car? You have 3 days, go drive it around the track, right? So they let these various teams from AI people test the world's greatest AI. Some said compose a novel with this as the plot, or write a symphony with these notes, write a poem, draw a picture. Well, one team fed it photographs from the Chinese probes that are on the moon that landed a couple of years ago. And this particular AI has a specific deep fake detection program. There are these videos that look like Obama or Trump or whoever, but they're really not them, right? This computer has never been wrong. It always knows the difference between a real picture and a fake picture. So they fed it, this team, pictures of the moon surface from the Chinese probes, and it said they were real, 100% real, 100% sure. Then, in comparison, they fed it pictures from the Apollo moon landings, and all the areas of the picture were red. The background is fake. The foreground is fake. The astronaut is fake. It was a model. It was a doll in this particular. The footprints weren't the way a human walked. They were stamped in there with a little toothpick because they wanted this vast landscape. So it was a miniature. It proved that the moon landings were fake. Now, why is this not reported on RT or Fox or anywhere? In fact, if you track down the original link of the Russian story, it warns you that if you click on it to read the article, all the data on your computer will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. That's how desperate they are. Fox contacted me, I think, like a year ago, because a year ago, the former director of the Russian Space Agency, NASA's equivalent, publicly said, and I think he wasn't supposed to, the moon landings of the Americans are fake. Well, Fox News calls me up the next day. We're going to do an hour-long special. And they tell me they were very honest. They said, we haven't read your book, we haven't watched your movies, and we will conclude that the moon landings are real. That's the point of the program, to put out the fire that happened the day earlier of the Russian NASA equivalent saying the moon landings are fake. And in this hour-long special, I only did it because they paid me, right? Yeah, make a fun out of me for a couple of $1,000. Yeah, pay my rent. They quoted a guy from 1969, some Russian scientist in 1969 said that congratulations. And that's what they showed in the hour-long special. They did not choose to show what was quoted a few weeks earlier of the former director of the Russian Space Agency saying they were fake. Now, if that's not selective editing, I don't know what is.